Hi everyone, it's Kelly here and welcome if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. We talk books on this channel and today I am wrapping up my reading month in April. And it was a great reading month for me. I had a 2-week holiday break which included a trip to the ocean. So I had plenty of reading time and I managed to take advantage of that because sometimes I don't. Sometimes I've got a big break time and I just don't do more reading, which is crazy. So this time I did. I definitely got my money's worth for that holiday. So today I'm going to be chatting about the books that I read in the month of April, and we're going to start with an audiobook. I don't have a copy of it with me here because I listened to it on audiobook, and it's called Exit Through the Gift Shop by Maryam Master. So this was a bit of a tricky one to begin with, and the reason was that it dealt with the topic of childhood cancer, which, as you could imagine, is a fairly sensitive subject for some people, and there have been some criticisms of this book that it deals with this topic too lightly. It's too flippant about potential outcomes from childhood cancer, and I certainly would not want to speak over those voices that have been affected by this topic. So I'm certainly not going to be giving this book. I did not give this book a high rating. I gave it a 2 out of 5. The things that were good about it was that the writing was quite masterful, I thought. And I thought that the author has done a very good job, mostly, of creating a child's authentic voice, which if you've been on this channel for some time, you may have heard me talking about before in relation to other books that I've read that have had a child narrator, because some authors just do such a terrible job of kind of creating a realistic child's voice that isn't too whiny or too, they haven't kind of fallen back on tropes. So I think in this case, she did do a good job of that. So credit where credit's due. I'm interested to see what this writer has to come up with in her next book, because I think her writing is quite good and I certainly would be happy to read another book by her. But yeah, it definitely is a tricky topic that she selected. The other thing that I thought she was a little bit flippant about was bullying, which is another topic that happens in this book. So I felt like for the age group that is the target age group for this book, some of the content is mishandled, particularly as it pertains to bullying. So I felt that the outcome of the bullying was not an appropriate response to what had occurred. So we never find out some information about the context of the bullying. I'm trying to say this in a roundabout way so that I don't give anything away. And that there has been if an adult perpetrated it, would definitely be criminal activity that's gone on. And it just, to me, the outcome of that at the end was not, in my opinion, an appropriate response to what had occurred. So yeah, I'm mixed feelings about this one. It could have been a really good book, but I think unfortunately, just because of the topic and the content mishandling what would otherwise have been a great book, turns out to be not so great a book. So interesting to see what this author has to come up with next. I believe this was a debut, so I think, I'll reserve my judgment until I have read a second book from this author, but certainly one to watch, I think, and I'll be keen to pick up her next book. All right, let's move on. So from a 2-star to a 5-star, my next book that I read was Any Ordinary Day by Leigh Sales. This was a gift to me at Christmas time, so thank you very much to Louisa. I loved this book. It was so good. Basically what it's about is So Leigh Sales is a journalist in Australia. She has been for decades, and she is writing about some of her experiences of interviewing people after something something quite horrific has happened in their life. So we're talking about experiencing terrorism, or an unexpected death, or a natural disaster. So something that has really kind of shaken a person's life, and, you know, nothing will ever be the same again, that sort of thing. And she's sort of just talking about the kinds of things that kind of we might fear, that are just really unlikely things that just happen to some people. So it was a really, really good read. I thought she dealt with this topic very sensitively, and it certainly was something that I will not forget in terms of reading. It's well researched. I think each of the people that she interviewed for the book added a lot of value to the book, and not just value, but also to our collective wisdom about, about this topic and understanding about this topic. It felt steady, because I think a book about this topic could certainly come across in an unsteady way, and that would be quite an acceptable thing for it to be. But this book feels steady, and I think that is the voice of Leigh Sales, as a steady journalist, somebody who is sort of someone we trust, and somebody who is, a very considered sort of person. So that was really great. I actually listened to this one on audiobook and sort of read along with it, and I think it was great to listen to. So it was narrated by the author, and I think that was a good audiobook to listen to, apart from the fact that she very audibly swallowed like a lot in the book, and that did kind of distract me a little bit as I was reading and listening to this book. But it was very compelling at the same time. So great book, highly recommended. If you're an Australian, a lot of these people will be very familiar to you, the ones that she interviews, because many of them are from, or all of them from, you would know either their situation or their name based on things we've heard in the news. People who are reading internationally might not be as aware of some of these things, although some of them are bigger news stories than just Australia news stories. So there might be a few familiar names or stories in there, but I still think, even if I didn't know, because there were a few that I hadn't heard of, and that didn't just detract or distract me, from reading the book or from getting a lot out of it. So highly recommended. Any Ordinary Day by Leigh Sales. Okay, the next one I do not have a copy with because I had to return it to the library, and it is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This book I gave 4.5 stars to. It's weird though, just putting that out there. So I don't think it would be for everybody, but I fell on the side of them being weird and wonderful, not weird and inaccessible. But I don't know if that's just from, some of the things that I have thought about in the past and have kind of grappled with myself in terms of the themes of the book. So essentially, to me, they kind of came across as fairy tales for adults. So there's a lot of stuff in there that would not be appropriate for kids. So please do not buy this book for your kids. But fairy tales in the sense of them sort of being a little bit otherworldly and sort of strange things going on. But the reactions and the interactions that are described are reflective of societal norms and societal, things that we've sort of thought about, or have dealt with within the real world, but she sort of added these kind of fantastical elements to them, I guess as a sort of to move us away from the reality. So she's writing about very real kind of ways of thinking, but that fantastical element kind of separates us, which I think allows you to enjoy the story, and then, you know, the ideas kind of just percolate up in the old brain. So yeah, it was very, very interesting. Lots of imagery and lots of metaphors, and I liked it. So yeah, I realize I haven't really told you much about what the book is about, but I guess it's kind of hard to pin down, to be honest. I would say it is quite feminist, in the sense that it is critiquing some of the dynamics that we sort of accept as being normal dynamics for relationships between men and women, but also there are same-sex relationships depicted in this book as well, and just sort of like looking at relationship dynamics, and also thinking about things like the male gaze and consumption of women's bodies, if that makes sense, in the sense of sort of like in a media kind of way, you know, things having to be acceptable for other people's eyes as opposed to just being acceptable because that is a female human body, or, you know, a female human mind. So yeah, it was really interesting, and it made me think a lot. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, I would recommend it. Yeah, so I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, so it was a really good read. Okay, next one. So the next book that I read was Your Own Kind of Girl by Clare Bowditch. I read this on my e-reader, and so that is ticking off one of my goals, which is because I have so many books on my e-reader that I kind of, because they're not in front of me, I forget they're there. So I'm aiming to read 10 ebooks, not new ones that are already on my device by the end of this year. So that was good. I was able to do that. And this book, it made me cry. I had actual tears running down my cheeks as I read so one of the things that she talks about, so this is a memoir, sorry, I should say. Clare Bowditch is an Australian singer whose career I have been following for some years now. And she had a really tragic thing happen to her in her early years, that her sister got very sick and passed away as a child, which was such a traumatic thing. So it was her older sister. She was very young at the time, and there's a lot of sort of trauma that came out of that for her, and of course for the rest of her family as well, as they dealt with such a tragic thing happening. And as she was talking about those things, I was bawling my eyes out. It was so sad. But also, I think Clare Bowditch's kind of shtick is that she's a very life-affirming sort of person. So even along with talking about that trauma, and there were some other events that happened in her life that were not great, things that were really difficult for her to work through and to deal with at the time, and then to deal with later as well. But yeah, even through talking about those things, there is this sort of life-affirming vibe that kind of comes through as well. It was so heartfelt, this book. It really, really was. And I think Clare Bowditch is a really delightful human being, and very real and very honest and open, which really came through in the book as well. One of the things that bothered me a little bit about this, there were actually a couple of typos in the ebook. I don't know if those would be present in the print book as well. I didn't have a look at it, so I couldn't say. It also could have done with a little bit more editing to remove some repetition and improve the flow of the book as a whole. But so ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars for that reason. But I really loved the conversational style of the book, and it was a very enjoyable read. So definitely one to pick up if you are a fan of Clare's, or if you just love reading really heartfelt human stories. The next book that I read was called The Beatrice Prophecy by DiCamillo. This is a book I borrowed from my local library, so I do not have it with me anymore. I had to return it. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I felt like it was a fun romp with very likable characters. We've got Beatrice, we've got Answelica the goat, who is probably like the piece de resistance of this book, to be honest. John Dory, Brother Edic, and Cannock, and it just sort of, that it was very easy to read for that reason, because we have these gorgeous characters who are very likable. You want them to win. You're rooting for them the whole time. So it was definitely enjoyable from that perspective. Some aspects of the story I felt were too quickly solved, and bits of it were a little bit trite as well. But again, I'm not the intended audience of this book. It's a middle grade. So I think it's something that you kind of have to overlook in books that are not written for you, with you as the audience in mind. The character's great, as I said, and overall the message of love was quite sweet. So this is definitely one that you could buy as a present for a kid. It was quite readable in that way, and I think it would be an enjoyable story for young people as well. Okay, now I've got a book to show you. Haven't been too many so far. This one is Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. I picked this up because as part of this month, I was doing a readathon, and one of the prompts was a book that feels like autumn, or because I'm in the southern hemisphere, it's autumn right now, or spring if you're in the northern hemisphere. So I didn't know really anything about this book. It got recommended to me somehow in the algorithm. I don't know, the internet recommended this book to me, but so I didn't know anything about it. It didn't turn out to have particularly autumny vibes, although the cover to me does look a little bit autumny, which is why I picked it up. This is a romance novel, and as romance novels go, because this is not really a genre that I read a whole lot of, because I think a lot of romance novels are quite poorly written. I'm sure there are exceptions, don't come at me. It's just not a genre that I particularly enjoy, just for that reason. But I felt like this one was not too bad as romance novels go. I ended up giving it 4, and I am going to seek out the second one in the series if I can. So there were a few cringy moments that you would typically find in a romance novel, but otherwise it was quite fun and light-hearted as a book to read. One thing that frustrated me about this book, and this is something that comes up in romance novels, and it's a trope, I guess, which is the fact that I just will never understand why adults cannot talk to one another. And it's a thing that happens in a lot of romance books, this one not being an exception to this, where, you know, there's a misunderstanding, or the fact that they just don't have a conversation about a thing means that they end up kind of like worrying over it for an unnecessary amount of time, or it ends up sort of pulling the romantic couple apart, only for them to come back together again later. Yeah, so it's just silliness, in my opinion. Just have a conversation and it solves the problem, like, you know. Anyway, anyway, as I say, the main characters are quite likable. It was an enjoyable book from that perspective, because I liked them. I liked their storyline of trying to keep a knitting shop open. It was kind of sweet. And I would say, as romances go, this is a bit of a slow burn. You don't get much romance, shall we say, until a little bit into the book. So it takes a bit of time. So if you're looking for a romance book that is romantic from the get-go, this is not the book for you. But if you don't mind a bit of a slow burn building romance, then I would recommend this one. So yeah, I did give it 4 out of 5 stars, and I enjoyed it. Okay, the next one, we're back, unfortunately, to our ebooks. But again, it was another one I was able to tick off my list for this year, of trying to read through my backlog of books on my e-reader. So this is Zikora by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm sure I mispronounced that name, and I apologize profusely. I gave this 4 out of 5. It's a short story, but there was a lot crammed into it. So it, if I were reading a print version, it would have been 35 pages long, very, very short. But it was a really, as I say, a lot goes on in 35 pages. So the author is exploring unwanted pregnancy, abortion, complex family dynamics, marriage conventions, men's lack of knowledge about female bodies, the impact of porn, pregnancy, birth, and much, much more. So it really has a lot in it. So Zekora is the name of the main character. She's in her 30s. She has a successful legal career, and she ends up falling pregnant. And her boyfriend, who she sort of considered to be quite perfect, ends up leaving her because he doesn't want children. So yeah, pretty rough. But her mother flies to the US from Nigeria to be with her for the birth. And we follow Zekora's thoughts as she is giving birth and sort of reflecting back on her circumstances. I will say the ending is a little bit abrupt, and I kind of wanted a little bit more in terms of like knowing what is going on, kind of thing, like what was going to happen next. So if that's going to be a bother to you, then don't pick this one up. But it's a good quick read, and very enjoyable. 4 out of 5 stars for me. All right, the last 3 books I have physical copies of. So I'm going to pop my notebook down, maybe, and try not to drop anything. Okay. The next book that I read is Matrix by Groff. This is a book that I have been looking forward to reading for some time now. It was recommended to me by multiple people, knowing that it is right up my alley. For some reason, I cannot tell you why, I love a book that is set in an abbey. I don't know why. It's just a thing that really is a great setting for me. I also love a book that is full of strong female characters, and this is definitely that. So yeah, it sort of was like the perfect collision of a couple of my my likes and things that I enjoy reading. So I have been looking forward to it. I will also link to you links in the description and possibly in the cards. Rick McDonnell's review of this book, because to be honest, that was probably the thing that made me I instantly bought it after I saw that review. So I think that will probably give you an idea of the the interest I had in this book as I was going into it. I loved it. It was great. It was kind of mad, a bit strange, but the writing style was quite unique and seemed to kind of, in my opinion, mirror the thinking of the main character Marie at the time. So it starts off, and it actually spans quite a lot of time. So it begins with her as a sort of teenager, I guess, and then follows her entire life into being an old lady, basically. So yeah, it was very, as her thinking changed, as she aged and, circumstances happened and she started thinking about things differently, the writing style really reflected that kind of the pace of her thinking, and also how much she was worrying over a particular thing, or, that sort of thing. So the pacing and the style kind of changes throughout the book as I read it. I think it's brilliantly written, and it's really full of lovable characters. You really, really want Marie to succeed, and you want everything to be okay for the nuns in her care, and for them to be able to maintain what they're building under her command. That's probably the wrong word. Leadership, under her leadership. So yeah, can highly recommend. I loved this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars out of 5. Okay, the next book that I read is Rush O by Shirley Barrett. And I also loved this book. I also gave it 4.5 stars. It was so good. The banter and dry wit was everything in this book. So the plot is we follow Mary, and she is a teenager, but she's thinking back to these teenage years and writing as an adult. So she's writing it as a memoir, and she is the daughter of the fearless George Davidson, who is master whaler of Eden on the south coast of New South Wales. So I should say I was on holidays on the south coast of New South Wales when I was reading this book. Not quite as far as Eden, but I was kind of I held off on reading this book until I was there so that I could enjoy it in sort of vaguely the area where it's set. So I'm not about whaling. I'm not, I don't agree with the idea of whaling, but it's definitely a part of our history. This is a historical fiction. I find it interesting from the point of view of kind of thinking about it as a resource that was used at the time, and also just sort of hearing the stories of the people who worked in that industry. So at the time, we have a small crew of men who go out whaling, but they have this quite unique relationship with killer whales in the area, and this is based on true things that happened, because as we know, killer whales or orcas are quite intelligent, and they worked with the whalers to bring down a whale. And basically once they were able to kind of catch the whale and guide it to a particular area, the killer whales would eat bits of it, and then they would wait until it kind of started to decompose and fill with gas, and then it would rise to the top, and that's when they would kind of bring it in and extract what they needed to extract. So bit graphic, we'll say that. There are some quite graphic scenes in terms of the killing and the deconstructing of a carcass of a whale. So if that doesn't sound like something you can handle, definitely steer clear of this one. I am a vegetarian, and I was okay with reading this, just because I feel like the historical context kind of gives a bit of separation. There were a few points where I was like wincing a little bit as I was reading some of the detail, but otherwise it was a really, really interesting kind of look at that that time and that place in Twofold Bay near Eden. So the killer whales were known not just to the whalers but also to like the people of the town, because and they would be able to spot them via their distinctive is it called a dorsal fin, the one that sort of sticks up out of the water, and so they, people would write, it was written about in the newspapers, it was all over the place, and the leader of the killer whales was called Old Tom. And I have to say as well, there are historical notes at the back of the book, and they were really, really interesting, excellent. And now I really want to go to Eden because Old Tom's skeleton is on display in the Killer Whale Museum there. So I really, really would like to go and see that now. So yeah, really, really interesting. Rush O by Shirley Barrett. Highly recommended if you can stomach a couple of fairly graphic scenes of tracking and killing whales, as well as using their bodies for all of the things that whale blubber and so on was used for in the past. Okay, last one. My final book for the month of April is Labyrinth, I should say, by Amanda Lohrey. This book was the winner of the Miles Franklin Literary Award last year in 2021. And so I've been keen to get to it to sort of see what the hype's about. It was a really enjoyable read. Very slow burn, I will say. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Very character driven. And it's the story of Erica and her obsession to build a labyrinth after moving to a small coastal town to be near her imprisoned son. It's slow paced, as I said, but it remained compelling throughout the book, I felt. It's definitely something that was quite readable, even though it was slow paced and very character driven. If you're not a character driven type of reader, you probably won't enjoy this very much, but I do quite like the kind of development. One of the things that I think was really good about this book, just in terms of it breaking convention a little bit, is that there wasn't really a central romance to it at all. You know, when you read books that are about older protagonists, so I would say from memory, I think the main character was probably in her late 30s, early 40s, and single. But yeah, and although there was a little bit of romance in the sense of, you know, her kind of revisiting an old flame, it wasn't a central part of the plot at all. And it wasn't something that kind of continued throughout the book, which I found quite refreshing. Like, it was nice to kind of read about a woman's, you know, inner life without it revolving around trying to get laid or find a husband, or I don't know, the things that you typically read about when you're reading about protagonists. I'm saying older protagonists. I would be protagonists that are my age. You know, so I think, yeah, it was a very enjoyable book, and I would recommend it, as would the committee that judged the Miles Franklin Literary Award in 2021. Okay, so that is my reading for the month of April. Here are my physical copies of books that I had. Of course, I had quite a few others that I was reading on various platforms, either audiobooks or I was also reading some of my ebooks, which was great. I'm able to tick a few things off this month, and I'm looking forward to a good May. I'm already into May a little bit now, and I'll be honest with you, I have not picked up a book yet, but I have some plans once I get an assignment done that I am stalling on a little bit. So that is my plan, to get a bit of reading done in the month of May. But April has been very productive. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.